The dust cloud rising from the valley road caught Fletcher Webb's attention, just as he was about to burn every letter he had ever written to his dead wife. He stood on the porch of his ranch house outside Presidio, Texas, in the spring of 1882, holding a bundle of yellowed envelopes tied with string. His fingers trembled slightly as he watched the approaching rider, a distraction from the painful task he had set himself. 3 years had passed since consumption had taken Margaret from him, and he had spent every day since then trying to outrun the grief. The ranch had grown during that time, his cattle business prospering even as his heart withered. But success meant nothing when he came home each night to an empty house and memories that cut like broken glass. The rider drew closer, and Fletcher realized it was not a single horseman but a small wagon pulled by a tired-looking mare. He set the letters down on the porch railing, his hand instinctively moving to check that his pistol was secure at his hip. Visitors were rare this far from town, and in Texas in 1882, caution was not just wise but necessary for survival. As the wagon pulled into his yard, Fletcher saw that the driver was a woman, her dark hair pulled back beneath a practical bonnet, her dress covered in the fine dust of the Texas roads. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, though the sun and hardship could age a person prematurely out here. What struck him most was the determined set of her jaw and the way she handled the reins with capable hands. She pulled the wagon to a stop and looked directly at him with eyes the color of amber in sunlight. "Mr. Webb." Her voice carried a slight tremor, though whether from exhaustion or nerves he could not tell. "That would be me," Fletcher replied, stepping down from the porch. He was a tall man, lean from hard work, with brown hair that had begun to show threads of silver at the temples despite him being only 32. "What can I do for you, miss?" The woman climbed down from the wagon seat with practiced ease, brushing dust from her skirt. Up close, Fletcher could see the fine lines of fatigue around her eyes and the way her hands shook slightly. "My name is Clara Owens. I have traveled from San Antonio to speak with you about a matter of great importance." Fletcher's curiosity deepened. San Antonio was over 200 miles away, a journey of several days by wagon. "That is quite a distance to travel. Would you like some water? Your horse looks like it could use some rest." Relief flickered across Clara's face. "Thank you. That would be very kind." As Fletcher tended to her mare, drawing water from the well and offering feed, Clara stood in the yard looking at the ranch with an expression he could not quite read. The Webb ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a sturdy house, a barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. The land stretched for miles in every direction, rolling hills covered in the tough grasses that sustained his cattle herd. When the horse was settled, Fletcher gestured toward the house. "Come inside, Miss Owens. You can tell me what brought you all this way." Clara hesitated, her eyes moving to the porch where the bundle of letters still sat on the railing. Something flickered in her expression, a recognition that made Fletcher's chest tighten with an unnamed apprehension. Inside the house, Fletcher poured water from a pitcher into a clean glass and offered it to Clara. She drank gratefully, and he found himself studying her more carefully. She was beautiful in an understated way, with delicate features and that remarkable amber gaze. But more than that, there was an intelligence in her eyes and a strength in the way she carried herself that commanded respect. "Mr. Webb," she began, setting down the empty glass, "I need to tell you something that may come as quite a shock. I knew your wife, Margaret." Fletcher felt as though the floor had shifted beneath his feet. "You knew Margaret," Clara nodded, her hands clasping together in her lap. "We grew up together in Tennessee. We were the closest of friends from the time we were children until she moved to Texas. We corresponded regularly through letters." The room seemed to tilt. Margaret had rarely spoken of her childhood, always saying the past was too painful to revisit. Fletcher had respected that silence, never pushing for details she was unwilling to share. "Margaret never mentioned you," he said, and immediately regretted the harsh edge in his voice. If Clara was offended, she did not show it. She would not have. "The reasons are complicated, and that is part of why I am here." She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "After Margaret passed, her sister sent me the letters I had written to her over the years, but she also sent me something else. Letters that Margaret had written but never sent, letters addressed to you." Fletcher's heart began to pound. "Letters to me? What do you mean she never sent them?" Clara reached into a cloth bag she had carried in with her and withdrew a bundle of envelopes, much like the ones Fletcher had left on the porch. "Margaret wrote to you constantly during the last year of her life. She poured her heart into these letters, but she was too afraid to send them. I think she feared that if she revealed everything in her heart, everything about her past and her feelings, it would change how you saw her." Fletcher's hands shook as he took the bundle. His name was written on each envelope in Margaret's familiar flowing script. "I do not understand. Why would she hide her feelings from me? We were married. We shared everything." Clara's eyes filled with sympathy. "Did you? Mr. Webb, forgive me for being blunt, but Margaret told me in her letters to me that she felt you had closed yourself off after the first year of your marriage. She said you had become distant, that you worked from dawn until long after dark, that you rarely spoke of anything beyond the necessities of running the ranch." The words struck Fletcher like physical blows because they carried the ring of truth. After their daughter had been stillborn in their first year of marriage, he had thrown himself into work, unable to face the grief, unable to comfort Margaret when he could barely function himself. He had told himself he was providing for their future, building something strong and lasting, but perhaps he had simply been running away. "I was trying to be strong for her," Fletcher said quietly. "I thought if I could build something successful, something secure, it would make up for what we had lost." "She understood that," Clara said gently. "But she needed you, not just your provision. She needed your presence, your heart." She gestured to the letters. "It is all in there. Everything she felt, everything she wished she could say to you but did not know how." Fletcher stared at the bundle in his hands, almost afraid to open it. "Why did her sister send these to you? Why did you travel all this way to bring them to me?" Clara looked down at her hands. "Because Margaret made me promise, in one of her last letters to me before she became too ill to write, that if anything happened to her, I would make sure you knew the truth. She said she could not bear the thought of you living the rest of your life not knowing how deeply she loved you, how much she regretted the distance between you." A lump formed in Fletcher's throat. "You have fulfilled your promise. You could have mailed these." "I could have," Clara agreed. "But I also came because I need to tell you about Margaret's past, the things she was too afraid to reveal. And those are not things that should be learned from a letter." Fletcher set down the bundle carefully on the table between them. "Tell me." Clara took a breath, and he could see this was difficult for her. "Margaret and I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. Her family was prominent, well respected. My family worked for them. My mother was their housekeeper, my father their stable master. Margaret and I became friends despite the difference in our stations, and her parents were kind enough to allow it." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When Margaret was 18, she fell in love with a young man, a clerk in her father's business. Her parents disapproved strongly. They had arranged for her to marry the son of another prominent family. When Margaret refused, they sent her away to live with an aunt in St. Louis, hoping distance would make her forget the clerk." Fletcher listened intently, learning about a woman he realized he had never truly known. "While in St. Louis," Clara continued, "Margaret discovered she was with child. The clerk had promised to follow her, to marry her despite her family's objections, but he never came. Margaret was desperate. The scandal would have destroyed her family's reputation and left her destitute. So she did the only thing she felt she could do. She gave birth in secret, with only a midwife present, and the baby was given to a childless couple who desperately wanted a child. Fletcher felt the breath leave his lungs. Margaret had a child, before we met. Clara nodded, tears now visible in her eyes. A son. She never even held him, Mr. Webb. The midwife took him away immediately, saying it would be easier that way. Margaret carried that pain for the rest of her life. And when your own child was stillborn, it reopened that wound in ways I cannot begin to imagine. The room spun. Fletcher stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the land without really seeing it. Everything he thought he knew about his marriage, about his wife, was reshaping itself in his mind. Why did she not tell me? Did she think I would judge her? She was terrified you would, Clara said softly. In her letters to me, she wrote about how much she loved you, how you were a good man, strong and honorable. But she also wrote that she felt she did not deserve that goodness. She carried such guilt, such shame, even though what happened to her was not truly her fault. She was young in love and betrayed by a man who made promises he never intended to keep. Fletcher turned back to face Clara. I would never have judged her for that. I would have held her and told her none of it mattered, that I loved her regardless. I believe you, Clara said. But Margaret could not believe it. She could not forgive herself, so she could not imagine you forgiving her. She gestured again to the letters. But it is all in there. Every feeling, every regret, every moment of love she felt for you but could not express. She wrote it all down, Mr. Webb. She left you her heart in those pages. Fletcher picked up the bundle again, his fingers tracing Margaret's handwriting. Will you stay? He asked suddenly. At least for tonight. It is a long journey back to San Antonio, and I would like to speak more with you about Margaret. You knew her in ways I never did. I would like to understand her better, even if it is too late. Clara hesitated. I do not wish to impose. You would not be imposing. I have a guest room. It is not much, but it is clean and comfortable. Please, you have traveled so far to bring me this gift. Let me at least offer you hospitality in return. After a moment, Clara nodded. Thank you. I confess I am quite exhausted. Fletcher showed Clara to the guest room, a small space with a simple bed and a washstand. He brought her fresh water and towels, then left her to rest while he returned to the main room of the house. He sat at the table and carefully opened the first of Margaret's letters. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. Margaret's voice came through so clearly it was as if she were in the room with him. She wrote of loving him, of watching him work and wishing he would come inside and simply sit with her. She wrote of her fear that he regretted marrying her after the loss of their child. She wrote of her own childhood, the pressure from her parents, the betrayal of the clerk she had loved. She wrote of the agony of giving up her son and how it haunted her dreams. But mostly, she wrote of love. Deep, abiding, frustrated love for a husband she felt was slipping away from her, even as she desperately wanted to hold on. Fletcher read through the afternoon and into the evening, tears streaming down his face. By the time he finished the last letter, the sun had set, and the house was growing dark. He sat in the shadows, feeling as though his heart had been broken open and emptied out. He heard soft footsteps and looked up to see Clara standing in the doorway. She had removed her bonnet, and her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders. In the dim light, she looked young and uncertain. I am sorry, she said quietly. I did not mean to intrude. I heard sounds and wanted to make sure you were well. Fletcher wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand. I have spent 3 years grieving a woman I never truly knew, and now I have to grieve all over again for the woman she actually was, the woman she never showed me. Clara came into the room and lit a lamp, casting warm light across the space. She showed you more than you realize, Mr. Webb. In her letters to me, she wrote often of small moments between you, the way you would bring her wildflowers when you came in from the range, the way you kissed her forehead before you left each morning, the way you held her when she was sick. She saw your love, even if she could not fully accept it or return it as openly as she wished. It was not enough, Fletcher said bitterly. I should have tried harder. I should have pushed past her walls instead of retreating behind my own. Clara sat down across from him. You cannot change the past, Mr. Webb. None of us can. But Margaret wanted you to have these letters because she hoped they would free you from the half-truths and silence that marked your marriage. She wanted you to know you were loved, deeply and truly, even if she did it imperfectly. Fletcher looked at this woman who had traveled so far to deliver such a painful gift. Why did you really come all this way? You could have sent these with a courier. There is more to this, is there not? Clara's amber eyes met his, and he saw vulnerability there. You are right. There is more. When Margaret's sister sent me these letters, she also sent me one from Margaret addressed to me specifically, written just days before she died. In it, Margaret asked me to do more than just deliver her letters to you. She asked me to check on you, to make sure you were well, to make sure you were not drowning in grief as she feared you would be. You did not have to honor that request, Fletcher said. I did, Clara replied firmly. Margaret was my dearest friend. I loved her like a sister. And more than that, She paused, seeming to struggle with her words. I have spent the last 3 years feeling as though I failed her. She wrote to me about her pain, her loneliness, her fear that she was losing you. And I wrote back with sympathy and advice, but I never came to visit. I never did more than send words on paper. I told myself the distance was too great, that I had my own struggles, my own life. But the truth is I was a coward. And when she died, I felt I had abandoned her when she needed a friend most. Fletcher heard the genuine anguish in her voice. You cannot blame yourself for that. Can I not? Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. So I came here partly to honor her last request, yes, but also to atone for my failure, and perhaps to find some peace for myself. They sat in silence for a moment, two people bonded by grief and regret over a woman they had both loved and both felt they had failed. Finally, Fletcher spoke. You must be hungry. Let me prepare something for supper. They moved to the kitchen, and Fletcher was surprised to find how comfortable it felt to have another person in the house. Clara insisted on helping, and together they prepared a simple meal of salt pork, beans, and cornbread. As they worked, they talked more about Margaret, sharing memories, filling in the gaps in each other's knowledge. She loved to sing, Clara said as she stirred the beans. Did she ever sing for you? Fletcher shook his head. I never heard her sing. That makes me sad, Clara said softly. She had the most beautiful voice. When we were girls, she would sing all the time. But I suppose after everything that happened, she lost that part of herself. They ate at the kitchen table, and the conversation gradually shifted from Margaret to their own lives. Clara told him about her life in San Antonio, where she worked as a seamstress and lived in a small boarding house. She spoke of the challenges of making her own way in the world as an unmarried woman, but also of the satisfaction of her independence. Fletcher found himself sharing more than he had with anyone in years. He told her about building the ranch from almost nothing, about the loneliness of the past 3 years, about his fear that he had somehow been responsible for Margaret's death, as if his emotional distance had made her more susceptible to the illness that took her. Consumption is a disease, Mr. Webb, Clara said firmly. It has nothing to do with heartbreak or loneliness. My own father died of it. It takes the strong and the weak, the happy and the sad without discrimination. Please, Fletcher said, call me Fletcher. Mr. Webb makes me feel ancient. Clara smiled slightly. Only if you will call me Clara. After supper, they sat on the porch as the stars emerged overhead. The night air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Fletcher found himself acutely aware of Clara's presence beside him, the way the lamplight from inside caught in her hair, the quiet strength she radiated. "What will you do now?" Fletcher asked. "Will you return to San Antonio?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "I suppose I will. Though I confess the journey was harder than I anticipated. The roads are not always safe for a woman traveling alone." Fletcher frowned. "You traveled all this way by yourself. That was dangerous." "I had little choice," Clara said. "I could not afford to hire an escort, and I would not ask anyone to make such a journey on my behalf. I was fortunate. I only had one truly frightening encounter with some men on the road, but I managed to convince them I had nothing worth stealing." The thought of Clara in danger stirred something protective in Fletcher's chest. "You should not make that return journey alone. Stay a few days. Rest. Let your horse recover. Then I will escort you back to San Antonio myself." Clara turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. "I could not ask you to do that. Your ranch, your cattle. I have 2 ranch hands who can manage things for a week or 2. They are good men, trustworthy and capable. Please, Clara, let me do this. For Margaret, if for no other reason." Clara studied his face in the dim light, and Fletcher wondered what she saw there. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you. I will accept your kind offer." Over the next few days, an unexpected ease developed between them. Clara helped around the house, cooking and cleaning, but also mending some of Fletcher's worn clothes and bringing a warmth to the space that had been absent for years. Fletcher showed her around the ranch, introducing her to his ranch hands, Pedro and James, who treated her with respectful friendliness. Fletcher found himself watching Clara as she moved through his home and his life. He noticed the way she hummed softly while she worked, the way her face lit up when she saw a hawk circling overhead, the way she spoke gently to the horses and even to his old ranch dog, a gray-muzzled hound named Biscuit. One afternoon, they rode out to check on a herd of cattle in the eastern pasture. Clara sat her horse well, having learned to ride as a girl in Tennessee. As they paused on a hilltop overlooking the land, Clara turned to Fletcher with a thoughtful expression. "You have built something remarkable here," she said. "Margaret wrote about the ranch, but seeing it is different, you should be proud of what you have accomplished." Fletcher looked out over the land he had worked so hard to tame. It all felt hollow after she died. "Success means little when you have no one to share it with." Clara was quiet for a moment. "May I ask you something that might be too personal? After everything we have shared these past few days, I think we are beyond such concerns. Ask whatever you wish." "Do you think you will ever marry again? You are still a young man, Fletcher. You have many years ahead of you. Do you intend to spend them alone?" The question struck deeper than Clara probably intended. "I have not thought much about it. The idea of opening my heart to someone again, of risking that kind of loss, it feels impossible." "I understand," Clara said softly, "but living in fear of loss means not truly living at all. Margaret would not want you to lock yourself away for the rest of your life. What about you?" Fletcher asked. "You are young yourself. Have you never considered marriage?" A shadow crossed Clara's face. "I was engaged once, shortly after Margaret moved to Texas. He was a kind man, a shopkeeper in Knoxville. But when he discovered that I would not bring a dowry to the marriage, that my family had nothing to offer, he ended the engagement. It taught me that I could only truly rely on myself." Fletcher felt a surge of anger at the unknown shopkeeper. Then he was a fool who did not deserve you. Clara looked at him with surprise, then smiled. That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness. It is truth. You are intelligent, capable, and brave. You traveled hundreds of miles alone to honor a promise to a friend. Those are qualities worth far more than any dowry. A flush colored Clara's cheeks, and Fletcher realized how much he meant every word. Over these few days, he had come to admire Clara deeply. More than admire if he was honest with himself. But the timing felt wrong, the situation complicated by shared grief and the ghost of Margaret between them. That evening, as they prepared supper together, a comfortable silence between them, Fletcher found himself thinking about the future in a way he had not done in years. What would it be like to have Clara as a permanent presence in his life? To have someone to talk with in the evenings, to share the burden and joy of running the ranch, to build something together. But he pushed the thoughts away, feeling guilty. Margaret had been gone only 3 years. Was it wrong to be developing feelings for another woman so soon? And was it fair to Clara, who had come here out of duty to a dead friend, to burden her with his confused emotions? That night, Fletcher lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling. Down the hall, Clara slept in the guest room. The house felt different with her in it, warmer and more alive. For the first time since Margaret's death, Fletcher did not feel completely alone. The next day, Clara mentioned that she needed to wash some of her clothes, and Fletcher showed her to the wash house behind the main building. As she worked, he tended to some repairs on the barn door. He was concentrating on hammering a stubborn nail when Pedro approached him with a concerned expression. "Boss, we got a problem," Pedro said. "Found 3 head of cattle down in the south draw. They've been shot." Fletcher felt a cold anger settle in his gut. Cattle rustling was a constant threat, though he had been fortunate to avoid it until now. "Shot, you are certain?" "Yes, sir. And there are tracks heading south toward the Mexican border. 3, maybe 4 riders." Fletcher glanced toward the wash house where Clara was working. He did not want to leave her, but he needed to deal with this threat immediately. "Saddle my horse and yours. We are going to track them. Get James too, but first, let me speak with Miss Owens." He found Clara hanging wet clothes on a line strung between 2 posts. She looked up as he approached, immediately sensing something was wrong. "What has happened?" Fletcher explained the situation quickly. "I need to go deal with this, but I do not want to leave you here alone. Is there any way you would feel comfortable coming with us? I know it is not ideal, but—" Clara interrupted him. "I can handle a rifle if needed, and I would rather be with you than left here wondering what is happening. Let me change into something more practical for riding." Relief washed through Fletcher. Within 20 minutes, they were all mounted and heading south, following the clear trail left by the rustlers. Fletcher was impressed by how well Clara kept up, never complaining as they covered rough ground at a steady pace. They tracked the rustlers for several hours, the trail leading deeper into the rough country near the Rio Grande. Fletcher's anger grew as he thought about men stealing what he had worked so hard to build. But more than that, he felt a fierce protectiveness toward Clara. He should not have brought her into potential danger. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they spotted smoke from a campfire ahead. Fletcher signaled for everyone to stop and dismount. They tied the horses in a copse of mesquite trees and moved forward on foot. Peering over a ridge, Fletcher counted 4 men around a fire, his stolen cattle penned in a makeshift rope corral nearby. The men looked rough, armed, and unconcerned about being followed. "4 of them, 4 of us," James whispered. "What is the play, boss?" Fletcher considered their options. He could ride back to Presidio and get the sheriff, but by then the rustlers would be across the border with his cattle. He could try to take them by force, but that risked violence, especially with Clara present. Or he could try to negotiate, though cattle thieves were not known for their reasonable nature. Clara touched his arm lightly. "Let me go down there first," she whispered. Fletcher looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "Absolutely not. Listen to me," Clara said urgently. "They will not expect a woman. I can approach their camp claiming to be lost, in need of help. It will distract them, lower their guard. Then you three can move in with less risk of gunplay." "It is too dangerous," Fletcher said flatly. Clara met his eyes with determination. "No more dangerous than 4 men shooting at each other. Please, Fletcher, trust me." Every instinct Fletcher had screamed against putting Clara in harm's way, but he could also see the logic in her plan. Finally, reluctantly, he nodded. "If anything goes wrong, get down and stay down." "We will handle it." Clara smiled briefly, then stood and began walking toward the camp, leaving her rifle behind. Fletcher, Pedro, and James spread out, moving into better positions while keeping low. Fletcher watched, his heart in his throat, as Clara walked into the firelight. The rustlers jumped up, hands going to their guns, but Clara raised her hands in a gesture of peace. "Please do not shoot," she called out. "I am lost. My horse threw me miles back, and I have been walking for hours. I saw your fire and hoped you might help me." The men exchanged glances. One of them, apparently the leader, stepped forward. He was a big man with a scar across his cheek. "A woman out here alone. That is a mighty strange story." "My husband and I were traveling to Presidio," Clara said, and Fletcher noted how steady her voice remained despite what must be tremendous fear. "We had an argument and I rode off. My horse spooked at a snake and threw me. I have been trying to find my way back to the road ever since." The men seemed to buy the story, or at least to lower their guard. The leader gestured to the fire. "Come warm yourself then. We can give you some food and water. Maybe help you find your way come morning." Clara moved closer to the fire, and Fletcher saw his opportunity. He stood and cocked his rifle, the sound loud in the quiet evening. "Or maybe you gentlemen will come with us back to Presidio to explain why you are in possession of stolen cattle." The rustlers spun, reaching for their guns, but found themselves looking at 3 rifles pointed at them from different directions. The leader's hand froze on his pistol grip. "Easy now," Fletcher said calmly. "You are outflanked and outgunned. There is no need for anyone to die tonight. Just raise your hands slowly and step away from your weapons." For a tense moment, Fletcher thought the leader might try something stupid. But then the man raised his hands, and his companions followed suit. Pedro and James moved in to collect their weapons while Fletcher kept his rifle trained on the leader. Clara stepped quickly out of the firelight and came to stand beside Fletcher. He could feel her trembling slightly now that the danger had passed. "That was the bravest and most foolish thing I have ever seen," Fletcher murmured to her. "It worked, did not it?" Clara replied, and despite everything, Fletcher found himself fighting a smile. They tied up the rustlers and recovered the stolen cattle. It was too late to make it back to the ranch before full dark, so they decided to camp there for the night, taking turns keeping watch over their prisoners. Fletcher insisted that Clara get some rest, spreading out his own bedroll for her near the fire. As the night deepened and the others slept, Fletcher took the first watch. He sat with his rifle across his knees, staring into the darkness, his mind racing. Today had shown him something important. When he thought Clara was in danger, when he watched her walk into that camp, he had felt a fear unlike anything he had experienced in years. It was not just concern for another person's safety. It was the terror of losing someone who had become vitally important to him. He cared for Clara. More than cared, if he was honest. In the brief time she had been in his life, she had awakened something in him that he had thought died with Margaret. Hope, perhaps, or the possibility of happiness again. But was it too soon? Was it wrong to feel this way? A sound made him look up to see Clara sitting up, wrapped in the blanket. "Cannot sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head and came to sit beside him. "Too much excitement for one day, I think." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Finally, Clara spoke. "Fletcher, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "These past few days with you have been among the happiest of my life. I know that might sound strange given the circumstances that brought me here, but it is true. I feel like I have found something I did not even know I was looking for." Fletcher's heart began to pound. "I know what you mean. I have felt the same." Clara turned to look at him, her face barely visible in the firelight. "Margaret would want you to be happy. She said as much in her letter to me. She wrote that she hoped you would find someone who could love you the way you deserve to be loved, openly and without fear." "Did she really write that?" Fletcher asked, his voice rough with emotion. "She did. Margaret loved you, Fletcher. She just did not know how to show it the way she wanted to, but she would not want her death to be the end of your capacity for love and happiness." Fletcher reached out and took Clara's hand. It felt small and warm in his. "I think I am falling in love with you, Clara. I know it is fast, perhaps too fast, and I know the situation is complicated, but I cannot deny what I feel." Clara's eyes glistened with tears. "I am falling in love with you too. I have been fighting it, telling myself it is just the intimacy of shared grief or gratitude for your kindness. But it is more than that. You are a good man, Fletcher Webb, strong and kind and honest. Being here with you feels like coming home." Fletcher cupped her face gently with his free hand. "I do not want you to go back to San Antonio. I want you to stay here with me. Marry me, Clara. Help me build a life that has meaning and joy again." Clara closed her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Are you certain? We have known each other less than a week." "I have never been more certain of anything. These past few days have shown me who you are. I do not need more time to know that I want to spend my life with you." Clara opened her eyes and smiled through her tears. "Then yes, yes, I will marry you." Fletcher kissed her then, gently and sweetly, sealing the promise between them. When they parted, both were smiling despite the tears. "Margaret brought us together," Clara said softly. "In a way, this is her final gift to both of us." Fletcher nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. Margaret's letters had broken his heart open, but they had also freed him to love again. He silently thanked his first wife for loving him enough to want his happiness, even beyond her death. The next morning, they brought the rustlers and the recovered cattle back to Presidio. The sheriff was grateful for the capture and assured Fletcher that justice would be served. The whole town seemed to be talking about the incident and about the mysterious woman who had helped capture the criminals. Fletcher and Clara visited the church, where they spoke with Reverend Matthews about getting married. The Reverend, a kind man in his 60s, listened to their story with understanding. "It is unusual circumstances, I will grant you," he said. "But I have learned in my years of ministry that love follows its own timeline. If you are both certain of your feelings, I would be honored to perform the ceremony." They decided to wait 2 weeks, giving Clara time to settle in and for Fletcher to prepare the house properly for a wife. He also wanted to give anyone who might have objections time to voice them, though he could not imagine what those objections might be. During those 2 weeks, Clara moved into the guest room of the ranch house, and they fell into a rhythm of life together that felt both new and somehow familiar. They worked side by side during the days, rode out to check on the cattle, and sat together in the evenings talking and planning their future. Fletcher found himself sharing things with Clara that he had never shared with Margaret. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, about the years of drifting and working various jobs before settling in Texas. Clara told him more about her life in Tennessee and San Antonio, about the struggles and small victories of making her own way in the world. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Clara brought up a subject Fletcher had been wondering about. "Have you thought about children?" she asked. "I know what happened with Margaret, the loss you suffered. But would you want to try again? With me?" Fletcher was quiet for a moment, examining his own heart. "I would be lying if I said the thought did not terrify me, but yes, I would like to have children with you, a family, if that is something you want as well." Clara smiled. "I do, very much. I know there are no guarantees, no promises that everything will turn out well, but I think the possibility of joy is worth the risk of pain." Fletcher took her hand and brought it to his lips. "You are wise beyond your years, Clara Owens. Soon to be Clara Webb," she reminded him with a grin. The wedding took place on a warm spring morning, the church filled with many of the local ranchers and townspeople who had come to know and respect Fletcher over the years. Pedro and James stood as witnesses, both dressed in their best clothes and grinning broadly. Clara wore a simple but beautiful dress of cream-colored cotton that she had made herself. She had woven wildflowers into her dark hair, and Fletcher thought she looked like something out of a dream. As they stood before Reverend Matthews and exchanged vows, Fletcher felt a profound sense of rightness. This was not a betrayal of Margaret, but rather a continuation of his journey, made possible by her final act of love in ensuring he knew the truth. "I promise to love you openly and honestly," Fletcher said, holding both of Clara's hands in his. "To share my heart with you completely, holding nothing back. To work beside you, support you, and cherish you for all the days of my life." Clara's voice was strong and clear as she made her own vows. "I promise to stand with you through whatever comes, to be your partner in all things, to love you with my whole heart, to build a life with you filled with joy and meaning." When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause and cheers. Fletcher kissed his new bride with tears of happiness streaming down his face. The celebration continued at the ranch, where the community came together for a feast. Long tables had been set up outside, laden with food that various neighbors had contributed. There was music and dancing and laughter that rang out into the Texas night. As Fletcher danced with Clara under the stars, he caught sight of Pedro wiping his eyes and James slapping him on the back good-naturedly. He saw the happiness on the faces of people who had watched him struggle through grief and now rejoiced to see him find love again. "Thank you," Fletcher whispered to Clara as they swayed to the music. "For what?" she asked, looking up at him with those remarkable amber eyes. "For being brave enough to travel all this way, for caring enough about a friend to honor her last wishes, for seeing something in me worth loving." Clara reached up and touched his face gently. "I could say the same to you. You welcomed a stranger into your home and your heart. You gave me a place to belong when I did not even realize how desperately I needed one." As the celebration wound down and the guests eventually departed, Fletcher and Clara finally found themselves alone in the house that was now truly their home. They stood in the bedroom, suddenly shy with each other despite all the easy companionship of the past weeks. Fletcher cupped Clara's face in his hands. "I will spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy. That is my promise to you." Clara smiled and drew him close. "And I will do the same for you. We will make each other happy together." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a joining not just of bodies but of hearts and lives. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, talking quietly until sleep finally claimed them both. The months that followed were among the happiest Fletcher had ever known. He and Clara fell into a partnership that went beyond the typical roles of husband and wife. Clara took an active interest in the ranch, offering ideas and insights that Fletcher found valuable. She also brought her skills with needle and thread to good use, making curtains and cushions that transformed the stark ranch house into a real home. Fletcher made a conscious effort to be present in ways he had not been with Margaret. He came in from the range for lunch each day to spend time with Clara. He made sure they had at least one day each week where they did no work, but simply enjoyed being together, riding out to explore the land, or sitting on the porch talking for hours. Clara wrote to Margaret's sister, telling her about the marriage and thanking her again for sending the letters. The sister wrote back with warm wishes, saying she believed Margaret would be pleased that something good had come from her final gesture of love. One day, about 6 months into their marriage, Clara came out to where Fletcher was mending a section of fence. She had a strange expression on her face, somewhere between joy and apprehension. "I need to tell you something," she said. Fletcher immediately set down his tools, hearing the importance in her tone. "What is it?" Clara took his hands in hers. "I am with child. The doctor in town confirmed it this morning." Fletcher felt his world tilt. Joy and terror warred within him. He thought of his stillborn daughter, of Margaret's pain, of his own helplessness in the face of such loss. But he also thought of his promise to Clara, to risk pain for the possibility of joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Are you well? Is everything all right?" "The doctor says I am healthy and strong. He sees no reason why everything should not progress normally." Clara pulled back to look at him, searching his face. "I know this is frightening for you, but I am not Margaret, and this is not that time. We will face this together, and we will have faith." Fletcher nodded, forcing himself to breathe through the fear. "You are right. We will face this together, and no matter what happens, we will have each other." The pregnancy progressed without incident. Fletcher found himself hovering over Clara, trying not to be overprotective but unable to stop himself from worrying. Clara bore his concern with patience and humor, reassuring him constantly that she was fine. As her belly grew round with their child, Fletcher found himself talking to it, telling stories about the ranch and making promises about the future. Clara would laugh and place his hand on her stomach so he could feel the baby kick. "She is strong," Clara would say, or he. "Either way, our child will be a fighter." As Clara's due date approached, Fletcher made arrangements for Dr. Harrison from Presidio to stay at the ranch. He also asked Senora Martinez, Pedro's wife, to be present to help with the birth. He was taking no chances. Clara went into labor on a cool December evening. Fletcher paced the main room of the house, while Dr. Harrison and Senora Martinez attended to Clara in the bedroom. Every cry of pain that filtered through the door made him flinch. Pedro and James had offered to wait with him, but Fletcher had sent them away, unable to bear company in his anxiety. The hours stretched endlessly. Fletcher prayed with an intensity he had not felt since Margaret's final days. But this time he was not praying for someone to be spared death, but for new life to enter the world safely. Finally, as dawn was breaking on a new day, Fletcher heard a sound that made his heart stop and then race forward. The thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Dr. Harrison opened the door, his weathered face split in a wide smile. "Congratulations, Fletcher, you have a son, and your wife is doing just fine." Fletcher nearly collapsed with relief. "A son, Clara is well, truly, truly. She is exhausted, as you might imagine, but she is strong and healthy. Come meet your boy." Fletcher walked into the bedroom on shaking legs. Clara lay in the bed, looking pale and tired but radiantly happy. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was a tiny red-faced baby with a surprising amount of dark hair. "Fletcher," Clara said softly, "come meet your son." Fletcher approached the bed and looked down at the baby. The infant's eyes were closed, his tiny fists waving in the air as he continued to voice his displeasure at being born. Fletcher had never seen anything so small or so perfect. "He is beautiful," Fletcher said, his voice choked with emotion. "Can I hold him?" Clara carefully transferred the baby into Fletcher's arms. The weight was so slight, the body so fragile that Fletcher was terrified he might somehow break his son. But as he cradled the baby close, something inside him unlocked. This was his child, his and Clara's. A living symbol of their love and their future. "What should we name him?" Clara asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, holding his son, Fletcher knew exactly what felt right. "What do you think of Matthew? It was my father's name." "Matthew Charles, after both our fathers," Clara smiled. "Matthew Charles Webb, I think that is perfect." Matthew opened his eyes then, and Fletcher found himself staring into dark blue infant eyes that seemed to look right into his soul. "Hello, Matthew," Fletcher whispered. "Welcome to the world. I am your father, and I promise you right now that I will spend every day of my life loving you and protecting you and teaching you to be a good man." The baby made a small sound, and Fletcher felt tears stream down his face. This was what he and Margaret had been denied, what he had feared he would never experience. But here it was, a miracle of new life, made possible by Clara's strength and courage. Dr. Harrison stayed for 2 more days to make sure both mother and baby were progressing well. Before he left, he pulled Fletcher aside. "Your wife is a remarkable woman," he said. "She handled everything beautifully, but I want you to understand that she will need time to recover. No work, plenty of rest and good food. Can I count on you to make sure she follows orders?" "You have my word," Fletcher assured him. "I will take care of her," and he did. Over the following weeks, Fletcher took on extra work around the house while Clara focused on recovering and caring for Matthew. He found himself falling into the rhythms of fatherhood with surprising ease, learning to change diapers and warm bottles when Clara needed rest. He would walk the floor with Matthew in the middle of the night, singing old songs his own father had taught him and making up new ones. Clara would sometimes wake to find Fletcher sitting in the rocking chair by the window, Matthew asleep on his chest. The two of them bathed in moonlight. The sight always made her heart full. As spring arrived again, the ranch flourished under the careful management of Fletcher and his small crew. Word had spread about their growing success, and Fletcher began to get offers from other ranchers interested in buying breeding stock. The business was prospering in ways he had hardly dared to imagine. But more than the success of the ranch, Fletcher felt the success of his life. He had love, family, purpose, and joy. Every evening when he came in from work, Clara would greet him with a kiss and Matthew would reach for him with chubby baby hands. They would eat supper together, Clara filling him in on Matthew's latest accomplishments, Fletcher sharing stories about the day's work. On Matthew's first birthday, they had a small celebration at the ranch. Pedro and his wife came, along with James and several other friends from town. They watched as Matthew smashed his face into a cake that Clara had baked, laughing at his delighted surprise at the sweetness. That evening, after everyone had gone and Matthew was asleep in his crib, Fletcher and Clara sat on the porch as they so often did. Fletcher thought back to that day nearly 2 years ago when he had seen a dust cloud on the road and a woman approaching with a bundle of letters. "You ever think about how things might have gone differently?" Fletcher asked Clara. "If you had just mailed those letters instead of coming yourself?" Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think about it sometimes, but I believe this is how it was meant to be. Margaret knew what she was doing when she asked me to come here in person. I think somehow she knew that we needed each other, you and I." Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "She gave us both a gift. She gave me the truth about our marriage, painful as it was. But more than that, she gave me you." "We should visit her grave," Clara said. "Take Matthew to meet her in a way, tell her about our life and thank her for bringing us together." Fletcher nodded. "I would like that." The next week, they made the trip into Presidio and visited the small cemetery where Margaret was buried. Fletcher had not been there in over a year, his grief having gradually transformed from sharp pain to gentle melancholy. Now, standing at Margaret's grave with Clara beside him and Matthew in his arms, he felt only gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly to the headstone. "Thank you for loving me enough to want my happiness. Thank you for sending Clara to me. I hope wherever you are, you have found peace." Clara placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave, tears streaming down her face. "I miss you, my dear friend, but I promise I am taking good care of him. We are taking care of each other." Matthew babbled and reached toward the flowers, and Fletcher and Clara both laughed through their tears. As the months and years passed, the Webb family continued to grow and thrive. 2 years after Matthew's birth, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Margaret, honoring Fletcher's first wife. The little girl had her mother's amber eyes and her father's stubborn determination. Fletcher proved to be a devoted father, patient and loving with both children. He taught Matthew to ride and to care for the animals, and he was equally invested in teaching Rose, refusing to let her gender limit her opportunities. Clara supported this wholeheartedly, having learned from her own life the importance of capability and independence. The ranch expanded over the years, Fletcher's reputation for quality cattle spreading throughout Texas and beyond. He hired more hands, built additional outbuildings, and purchased more land. But no matter how busy he became, he always made time for his family. The lessons learned from his marriage to Margaret, the understanding that success meant nothing without connection, stayed with him always. When Matthew turned 10, he asked his father about the bundle of letters that still sat in a wooden box on the mantel. Fletcher had told his children age-appropriate versions of how he and Clara had met, but he had not shared all the details. Sitting on the porch one evening, with Matthew beside him and Rose playing nearby, Fletcher decided it was time to tell more of the story. "Those letters were written by my first wife, your mother's dear friend Margaret," Fletcher began. "She wrote them to me but never sent them. After she died, your mother traveled a very long way to bring them to me. It was an act of great courage and love, and it changed both our lives." "Did you love her?" Matthew asked. "Margaret, I did," Fletcher said honestly, "but I did not love her as well as I should have. I made mistakes, Matthew. I let grief and fear close my heart, but those letters taught me an important lesson. They taught me that love requires vulnerability and honesty. When your mother came into my life, I was able to love her the way she deserved because I had learned that lesson." Matthew was quiet, processing this. "Do you still think about Margaret?" "Sometimes," Fletcher admitted, "but not with pain anymore. I think about her with gratitude for what she taught me and for sending your mother to me. In a way, she gave me the family I have now." Rose had climbed into Fletcher's lap, listening even though she did not understand everything. "I like our family," she announced. Fletcher hugged her close. "So do I, sweetheart, so do I." Clara appeared in the doorway, watching the scene with a soft smile. Fletcher met her eyes and saw reflected there all the love and happiness they had built together. She came out and joined them, and they sat together as the sun set over the Texas plains, a family complete and content. Years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of family life. Matthew grew into a strong, thoughtful young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose developed her mother's practical nature and her father's determination. announcing at 16 that she intended to learn every aspect of ranch management so she could be a full partner in the business. Fletcher and Clara watched their children grow with pride and occasional wonder that these remarkable people had come from them. Their love for each other never diminished, but rather deepened and matured, weathering the challenges that all marriages face, but emerging stronger each time. When Fletcher turned 50, Clara organized a celebration at the ranch. Neighbors and friends came from miles around, and Fletcher was touched by the turnout. Pedro and James, now both in their 60s and still working on the ranch, made speeches about the boss who had become a true friend. Matthew and Rose presented their father with a hand-tooled saddle they had commissioned. His initials worked into the leather. But the moment Fletcher treasured most came that evening when everyone had left, and he sat on the porch with Clara, just the two of them as they had been so many evenings over the years. "I have been thinking," Clara said, taking his hand, "about that day I arrived here with Margaret's letters. I was so nervous, so uncertain of how you would receive me or the truths I had to tell. I never imagined it would lead to all of this." Fletcher brought her hand to his lips. "What do you think Margaret would say if she could see us now?" Clara smiled. "I think she would say her plan worked perfectly. Her plan." "I have thought about it often over the years," Clara said. "Margaret was many things, but she was not simple or straightforward. She knew she was dying, Fletcher. She knew that you would grieve and likely close yourself off completely. But she also knew me, knew that I had admired you from the stories she had told even before I met you. I think she hoped that by sending me here, by making me deliver those letters in person, she was giving us both a chance at something new." Fletcher considered this. "You think she was matchmaking from beyond the grave? I think she was loving us both enough to give us a path to each other. Whether we took that path was up to us, but she opened the possibility." The idea settled over Fletcher like a warm blanket. "If that is true, then she succeeded beyond anything she could have hoped for. This life we have built, this family, it is everything I never knew I needed." Clara leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The sounds of the ranch surrounded them, familiar and comforting. As Fletcher held his wife, he thought about the strange and winding path his life had taken. The grief and mistakes, the unexpected second chances, the courage of a woman who traveled hundreds of miles to honor a friend's last wish. All of it had led to this moment, this life, this love. "I love you, Clara Webb," he said softly. "Thank you for being brave enough to bring me those letters. Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me." "I love you too, Fletcher Webb," Clara replied. "Thank you for opening your heart again. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." They sat together as the night deepened, two people who had found each other through the most unexpected circumstances, whose love had grown from shared grief into something joyful and strong. The ranch that had once been Fletcher's lonely refuge had become a home filled with love, laughter, and the promise of future generations. And somewhere, perhaps, Margaret smiled, knowing that her final act of love had borne fruit beyond measure, that in giving Fletcher the truth, she had also given him the freedom to love again, and that the friendship she had cherished with Clara had transformed into something that honored them both. The Webb family continued to thrive for many years after. Matthew eventually married a schoolteacher from Presidio, a smart and kind woman named Elizabeth, and they gave Fletcher and Clara their first grandchildren. Rose married a young rancher from a neighboring spread, and together they expanded the family's holdings even further. Fletcher and Clara grew old together, their hair turning silver but their love never fading. They remained active partners in the ranch, until their health no longer permitted it. at which point they turned daily operations over to Matthew and Rose while still offering advice and wisdom. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Clara to the spot where he had first shown her the ranch all those years ago. They sat their horses on the hilltop, looking out over land that had been transformed by decades of hard work and careful stewardship. "You have any regrets?" Fletcher asked. Clara turned to him with a smile. "Not a single one. This life, this family, it has been more than I ever dreamed possible." "What about you?" Fletcher thought of Margaret, of the pain and loss that had once defined his existence. He thought of the bundle of letters that had changed everything, and he looked at Clara, the woman who had brought those letters and then stayed to help him build something beautiful from the ashes of grief. "No regrets," he said firmly. "Only gratitude." They rode back to the house hand in hand, two people who had found love in the most unexpected way and had nurtured it into something that would outlast them both. The ranch would continue, passed down through generations. The story of how Fletcher and Clara met would become family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren. And somewhere in heaven, perhaps Margaret watched over them all, satisfied that her final gift of love had created ripples that spread far beyond anything she could have imagined, bringing together two lonely souls and giving them the chance to create joy from sorrow, family from loss, and enduring love from honest truth. Years later, when Fletcher passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Clara held his hand and whispered words of love. She knew he was going to a place where Margaret waited, where old hurts were healed and understanding was complete. And she knew that one day she would follow, but not yet. She still had grandchildren to spoil, a ranch to oversee, and a life to live fully. Clara continued on for another 5 years, a matriarch beloved by her family and respected throughout the region. When her time finally came, she was surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all of them bearing the legacy of love that she and Fletcher had built together. She was buried next to Fletcher, and their graves were marked with simple stones that bore their names and dates, but also words that captured the essence of their story. On Fletcher's stone, he loved deeply and well. On Clara's, she brought light to his darkness. And between their graves, tended carefully by generations of family, grew a patch of wildflowers that bloomed every spring, a living testament to love that endured beyond death, to friendships that transformed lives, and to the courage it takes to open one's heart to the possibility of joy even after experiencing profound loss. The Webb Ranch continued to prosper, each generation adding their own chapter to the family story, but never forgetting the foundation that Fletcher and Clara had built. The bundle of Margaret's letters was preserved and became a family treasure, a reminder of where it all began and the power of honest truth to heal and transform. And so the story that began with a lonesome rancher seeing a woman approaching with letters ended with a legacy of love, family, and the enduring power of second chances, a testament to the truth that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places, and that love, when given freely and received with courage, can transform everything.